Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Gretchen Wall, the coordinator of the Produce Safety Alliance and Northeast Extension Associate. Welcome to this month's Produce Safety Educators Call number 48, where we're going to have a presentation from Hans Estrin from the University of Vermont Extension on tips for delivering Module 7, how to develop a farm food safety plan. As a reminder, everyone on the call today is going to be muted through the majority of the presentation. You do have the ability, if you're logged in online, to unmute yourself, and we may have some opportunity for engagement, both through audio or through the Q&A and the chat box. And I do know that Hans has some polls planned, so hopefully we'll make this an interactive presentation. We will have some time likely at the end for some questions and discussions and for you to share your ideas about Module 7 if you're an experienced trainer. And if we are not able to answer your questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the chat box. We can always follow up with you if you provide an email address. We'd be happy to answer your questions. The session is being recorded, and this presentation, the slides, will be shared via the listserv, and they're always going to be posted on our website under resources, and then you go to the drop down for Produce Safety Educators Group. So those will likely be up in the next few days. Just as a brief overview of today's agenda, we have just a few training updates regarding our PSA remote grower trainings. And then I'll turn it over to Tommy Saunders to do the introduction for our speaker today. And then Hans Estrin will give his presentation on Module 7. Then we'll have some time for questions and discussion throughout and at the end of the meeting. So with that, I just wanted to briefly highlight a few updates for those of you who are PSA trainers and PSA lead trainers. You may have seen an email come to your inbox on Friday, June 12th, that provided some updates regarding the remote PSA grower trainings. If you were familiar with the policy in the past, we originally had that policy. It was a temporary policy and it was going to the end of July. We have since decided to extend that temporary policy to September 30th of 2020, with the potential to extend it again based on what's going on in the world with coronavirus and travel status. And we'll likely probably revisit that sometime in August so that you as trainers can make plans for future remote grower trainings. But for now, that policy has been extended through September 30th, 2020. The other main component of that email update was talking about the new evaluation format for remote grower trainings, which actually went into effect today. And I'd like to review some of the previous evaluation efforts that we've gone through and then just briefly review the new training evaluation. And again, this is only for remote grower trainings. But previously, we had launched the course and there were some concerns expressed by trainers about utilizing a paper evaluation for a remote grower training, not only from the standpoint of having to mail those evaluations back from participants' homes or places of business, but also from the standpoint of anonymity. So we really wanted to make sure that we had some sort of evaluation format where they could fill it in, be anonymous, submit their responses. So we developed a fillable PDF form. And for those of you who have hosted PSA remote grower trainings in the past few weeks, you've likely experienced some of the pain and technical challenges of using that form. We thought it would be fairly straightforward, but it turns out there's a lot of technical issues with the platforms people were using. We were receiving a lot of blank evaluations. People were really struggling to fill out that in an electronic format. So as of today, we are no longer using either one of these formats, the paper format or the fillable PDF form for remote PSA grower trainings. We are now moving to a new format, which we're calling the Qualtrics evaluation. It's a web-based survey. It has all the same questions as the normal PSA grower training evaluation. It's just built into the Qualtrics platform. We're hoping that this is a bit more streamlined for both trainers and participants, and we anticipate fewer technical issues through the use of this electronic survey for remote PSA grower trainings. So we appreciate your feedback on all this, and we have made changes to the process in hopes that this makes it a lot easier for participants going forward. All of this information, by the way, is in the email that was sent on Friday, but I'm just going to briefly highlight some of the key components of this new remote PSA training evaluation. So if you are a trainer that already had a registered remote PSA grower training, you either have been contacted or will be contacted directly with the evaluation URL for your course. We'll send that to you directly, because whatever AFTO provided you with that fillable PDF initially, you are not to use that going forward. We will send you the URL. If you're registering a new course, it'll actually come in your registration email from AFTO. It will just be in that approval email for new courses. Just like the paper evaluations and the fillable form evaluations, do not reuse that unique link. That link at the end of it has a series of numbers and letters, which links back to your course ID. So that all comes into our system, so it's organized and we can easily look it up by trainer or by course type. So do not reuse those links, and the URL will need to be emailed to course participants during the course or before the course. However you decide to distribute that, that will be your responsibility. The same policies apply regarding evaluation return rates. So we are still going to ask a 50% evaluation return rate, and we will be providing evaluation summary reports. Those are the remark reports that we process for our system 1 week after the course concludes. There is a video tutorial that is now available, and if someone from the PSA team would kindly drop in that link to the chat box so people have that handy, that walks through everything I just talked about and a little bit more about how to actually work inside of that Qualtrics evaluation, the forward and back buttons, issues with cookies and browsers and that kind of stuff. That URL is available for you as a trainer. You can also send that to participants, but it's really geared towards you disseminating this particular evaluation as a trainer. And if you still need some technical assistance, feel free to contact Rob Way. His email is rfw2@cornell.edu. So with that, I'm going to turn it over here to Tommy Saunders, who's our Southeast Extension Associate, to introduce our speaker today. Tommy?
Thank you, Gretchen. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Gretchen said, my name is Tommy Saunders. I'm the Southeast Regional Extension Associate. And today it's my privilege to introduce you to Hans Estrin from the University of Vermont Extension. Hans is a produce safety specialist for UVM Extension. He co-developed UVM's practical produce safety program, and since 2014, leads and coordinates the community accreditation for produce safety with the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association. As an on-farm readiness review lead for Extension, Han provides on-farm technical support to help Vermont growers comply with FSMA and meet market expectations. Hans is an AFTO certified PSR lead trainer and regularly co-leads Produce Safety Alliance grower training courses. As a core member of UVM's Ag Engineering's post-harvest team, Hans is often on produce farms supporting Vermont growers and to pragmatically integrate efficiency, profitability, and food safety into the production system. In his former career, Hans taught high school science for decades around the globe and worked on several produce farms. Hans further supports the development of local produce markets and businesses. He co-founded the Windham Farm and Food Network, now Food Connects, helped launch Vermont Diners and Monadnock menus, and has supported the startup of other various Vermont food hubs. And with that, I will turn it over to Hans.
Thanks very much. My great pleasure to be here and be invited. Thank you, Produce Safety Alliance and Gretchen, for making this possible. And it's great to see so many folks out there. And so today, training approaches for Module 7, how to develop a produce safety plan. And I've taught this several times. I've been, teaching for 35 years approximately. I was like amazed to think back at that. And I have always early on had a problem where I would compare myself to these really experienced teachers that really just had everything dialed. And I taught biology, molecular genetics, microbiology, that kind of stuff at college and university and high school level. And I always thought, you know, okay, next year, I'm going to get it all together. I'm going to have all of my stuff together, all my lesson plans, everything's going to be right there. And it never happened. I always scrambled and couldn't figure it out, but I figured out after eventually that just to accept that. And part of the reason that I do that and have actually not formed a definite plan has to do with my style of teaching, and actually accepting who you are as a teacher is probably my main message here, and that authenticity, knowing yourself and accepting it, is going to make you is going to really improve your delivery and your training, your ability to train, and your effectiveness as a teacher. Okay, next slide. So I just, you know, I'd love to start just by getting a sense of who's out there. I'm talking to you, whoever is listening, and do you have a plan for your trainings? And let's just take a second to answer a couple poll questions. So Gretchen, if you wouldn't mind putting up the first one, we'll get a sense of who's out there. What is your past experience teaching or delivering produce safety trainings, PSA or other? So go ahead and answer that real quick, and let's get a sense. And panelists, please answer this as well.
All right, looks like we got quite a few votes in here. Give it another 5 or 6 seconds and I'll end the polling so that you can see. Can you see it now? I'm not sure what you guys are seeing on your screen, Hans.
I can see it.
Oh, okay.
And we have a majority up there, 78% voted.
Gotcha.
So yeah, why don't we go ahead and post it? All right, great. Yeah, this is great. We have some veterans out there, and those 4 of you that answered, I really hope you pipe up at some point, especially in the question answer. Some experienced educators, and the largest group overall would be the new and have yet to teach. So next, that's great. Next one. Have you experienced running virtual trainings? Let's just do it.
It's really interesting to see them go back and forth.
Yeah.
One's in the front runner and then all of a sudden it drops.
All right, let's end it at 30 seconds. Just get a sense here.
Okay.
All right. So we had most people, the majority voting again, and about even yes and not yet, but overall we have the no and not yet. So I have had one experience at this point. So it's an interesting thing that we're all facing right now, potentially, and certainly in the future. So last but not least, question. This is an important one. How much do you enjoy or look forward to running a training on average? So there might be some more, some less on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is dread, or not much, not at all. 5 is almost like vacation or good activity. Okay, just another couple seconds here. All right, why don't you end it?
Okay.
Great, that was also 75%. You guys are pretty good at answering. And this is good for the 2 of you that dread. I'm not sure if you're the most important, or I should just tell you to go do go out and sit by the pool or something. Who knows? But I'm glad you're here. And yeah, I mean, there's a whole range of feelings when you're approaching a training in a room full of people. And I've been in many different rooms with different kinds of attention, different levels of engagement. And to me, teaching had that, being able to actually interact live with that variable, that unknown of the energy that's created in a room, is what makes teaching fascinating, never boring. So let's go on to the next slide. And having a plan for the training is really important because, I think about delivering a training, and this idea of delivery is sort of, is a little weird in the sense of normally you deliver a package. And that would be delivering like the book, the training manual, and a grower who's motivated could sit down and learn a lot. But we're not doing that, right? So we need to have a delivery strategy. Delivery is an interactive thing, and that's where the sort of teaching comes in, right? And I like to think of it at the content is dead. And that really, in and of itself, it's nothing. It's words on a page, it's digital zeros and ones in a computer. And somehow either the teacher or the student or both has to breathe life into the content and into the space. So that's really the job when I think of it. And I kind of had settled on three keys to success to making a training engaging and effective. And one is really to think about as a teacher, your intrinsic motivation, actually what moves you when you're sort of sitting and making your plan. Two, thinking about how you actually energize, what's the fuel? You gotta breathe life into this dead thing, so it's gotta actually move. And what's your strategy for that? And finally, traction. So people's attention, especially there's 260 something slides, the last I counted, by the end of the day, they're gonna be really dead. So you've gotta be able to almost like hit a gong every few minutes and wake people up. So I think of that as like traction. It's like getting traction with the content, and you actually plan or insert, say, every 20, 30 minutes, some kind of sticky traction point where you're gonna wake people up. So those three things: motivation, energy, and traction. Next. So let's look at those three things one at a time. And the way I'm gonna do this is I'm not gonna go all the way through number 7. And this stuff really applies to any module, but I'm gonna really focus on number 7. And we'll look at a few places in number 7. I do have all the slides. We can refer to any particular slide if you have questions, but I want to sort of try to bring this to life, how I would do number 7. And this is for me, it's not for you. And that's really important. So I can't hand a canned curriculum to anyone or that and have it work. You need to own it and make it work for you. So what moves you? This effective teaching is going to be authentic. Teenagers, I've taught a lot of like upper level high school classes, they can see through any crap. Like, it does not matter. If you're faking it, they will know it. They're like sphinxes. And so being authentic is like the key starting point. And exposing your interests, your flow, curiosity, edge, your energy, that ability to be in your skin, be authentic, is what's going to give you authority and what is going to give you that kind of leverage. So yes, you have to be an expert. You have to actually know your subject matter. Or if you don't, you've got to embrace ignorance, and that can work as well. Next slide. Okay, so here we are. I like this, it's the end of a long day where there's been 200 and something slides already looked at. People are wanting to go home. And we start with produce safety plans. And the first thing that they learn is that this module or produce safety plan is actually not required. Next. So what I think about is this, okay, this is a total showstopper. End of the long day, and it's not needed. There's a typo there. Not needed. So in some ways, that is an opportunity, right? You can wing it, and the key is that actually this analogy, this entry point to. You're right, it's not needed, but it's like getting this huge complicated thing in this package in the mail, and you open it up. There are no instructions And there are no batteries for this big electric contraption. So the produce safety plan does that, and that's the point, that there's no way that you can actually make all this stuff in the PSA make sense unless you have a plan. Next slide. And that can get people's attention. And so, for example, I'll start with this motivation. I am a person that is very interested in synergy, right? I'm sort of whatever, I'm a flexible person, I'm open, I'm always interacting with people, I'm looking for opportunity, ways to kind of find win-wins. And so I will focus on that. I get excited about that. And the reason I like all this produce safety stuff is that it's not that I care overly about risk and food safety. I think it's small risk. But what is amazing to me is that by planning for risk reduction and sort of looking at flow and being efficient, that all these multiple benefits can come out. Reduce risks, increase farm efficiency, worker morale. I've seen that a million times where workers can take on management roles because the SOPs are clear and leading to profitability. So, I can kind of, a lot of growers, their eyes are at half mast at this point, and they are barely, they're going to make it through, obviously, but there's not much attention. And to just say, look, we're at a point here where this is the key. And not only is it sort of your license, but you also, if you make this your own and make it work for you, it's going to improve your business. And I've seen that a million times. So I'm saying it and I believe it, and it has some weight to it because of that. Next. I love kind of joking as I go along or making fun of stuff. So, this idea of putting on managing for risk reduction, not safety, right? So the key here is, separating or thinking about separating the contaminant poops from produce. And just like this, ain't rocket science. You guys can all do this. We've learned a lot of hard things, but it isn't that hard when it comes down to it. Next slide. And the key is that the grower is everyone in this room. The people sitting in that room are the people who are best suited to come up with this risk reduction strategy, which is the main point of a produce safety plan. And so putting on these glasses, using an extended analogy maybe that you can bring through the entire thing. Okay, time to put on risk reduction sunglasses. Next slide. How do you do this? You can identify risks, no problem, because you have been on your farm day in and day out. You know where the pinch points are. When all hell breaks loose, things go wrong, things aren't working well. That is where you got to focus. And so each farm's unique, and focusing on that. So it's kind of like the growers have been watching all day. They've been taking in these slides. I'm like, oh my God, all these thoughts going through their head. And being able at the very end of the day to say, okay, put that stuff aside. You've learned a lot of important stuff. Now focus on what your strengths as a grower are, what you see on your farm, and you've got the knowledge now. Put on these glasses, look at your system. Next slide. So finding really in a way that's an example of how I find my motivation, because I have clued in to what I find is really important, and I run with it and I hammer on it. And that allows people to wake up, or they see that. So what I'd love is for you to exercise your chat box. I'll look at it right now myself. And first time I've opened it. Okay, so right now, anyone who can, list one or two things that motivate you, get you fired up, or in the flow, in the moment, that could be applied to these produce safety trainings. It could be really anything. You love cats, something like that. So ideally, it's something you can write pretty quick. Let's see what comes in. So I'll give you about 30 seconds here. Okay, so we've got relieving farmer stress, making things clear, helping people lower their anxiety and make their time more effective. Riffing on what growers in the room have implemented with respects and practices, storytelling and meaning making, helping them feel like they have some control over all this craziness, giving people tools to make good decisions, empowering people to do better things. Engagement by students. Audience questions and a little straight-faced humor. Having a little fun, maybe, just maybe. Yeah, I actually, just reading that, it fires me up. That we're teaching, you know, this is a produce safety, risk reduction, whatever, but we have deeper motivations, which are about improving people's lives and having a good time. And that's super important. That is how we're going to get people engaged. Love working and learning from farmers. The energy is amazing. Ooh, I do too. Okay, next slide. So you've got to find that motivation somehow as you're planning, and pick one or two things and you're going to focus on them because if you can do that and it's authentic, you're going to carry the show. Okay, but to carry the show, you also need energy. I like this 100-watt idea, because your laptop uses about 100 watts of power, right? That's you know, amps times volts are 100 watts of power. And we actually, your body sitting here as you're watching the screen is using about 100 watts as well. So imagine yourself as a 100-watt light bulb. Going to sleep, you'll use less. When your mind wakes up, you're going to crank it right up to 150, something like that. So there's actual energy that is keeping this imagined structure, which is this whole produce safety thing, alive, both in the audience and in you. And you have to take the lead on it. So thinking about what do you have? Attention. If you can hear my voice right now and completely focus on it, you're going to be focusing energy and attention on something. That can happen in a room as well as you know, if you're leading or teaching in a room, you can just your focus alone and how engaged you are can captivate and hold the space. And it doesn't actually have to be loud or soft. You can actually be silent and still hold the space if you have attention, or take pauses. The composure, any of dynamics are important. You know, this loud, soft stuff, anything that holds the focus where you're putting energy in, and it's almost like you're feeding it the whole time. And that will help the growers who really need help at this point, because it's like the end of the, you know, the heartbreak hill at the end of the marathon. Next slide. So what I would do, just as an example, that take one is not up there, but this is take two. Take one is this. Okay, here we are at the beginning of number 7. The learning objectives, ladies and gentlemen, farmers and growers in the room, the learning objectives are to name the essential parts of a farm food safety plan. Describe why one qualified person should designate as the person responsible. Oh, stop that, stop. Okay, that was kind of my example of dead. So take 2 might be you spend time here. We've got to hit this slide. And after we've talked about, I've just gotten through, you know, talking about how produce safety plan actually isn't essential, but it is the essential part. How do you do? You know, what are we going to do here? We're going to look at the essential parts of how we actually make this plan. We're going to look at why one qualified person should be designated. We're looking at risk assessment as the key part of this thing. And we're looking at management steps and practices. That's really where the rubber hits the road. How are we going to do this? How are we going to reduce risk? And then we'll also spend some time looking at traceability, lots, if you don't know what that is, clean breaks, and actually looking at some resources at the end. So that's a take 2. And hopefully, if you highlight some key phrases, you can get through a really text-heavy slide and keep people engaged just with your voice and focusing Next slide. Exaggeration, humor, throwing in stuff. This can really energize because you're focusing energy on something. So, this came from actually wildlife, but, focusing and also your expertise, all this stuff focuses energy and drives it. So we don't have elephants here, but next slide. If that elephant actually was in your field and pooped on a lettuce, you could, I've taught microbiology. So really just coming from an elephant right down to 5 microns. And that lettuce leaf, we've just narrowed in an electron microscope of a stomata on the bottom side of that lettuce leaf, and there are E. coli all over it. And many people have seen this slide if you teach or have taught these things. But that kind of back and forth that really just gets people's attention, drives pause and drives focus to look at certain things. Next slide. So, things like this. So you, as a grower, if I'm talking to you growers out there, are the, you're the person who can develop practices to reduce risk. Next slide. So how do we go about doing this? We get into the meat of these slides. Time to put on your risk reduction sunglasses. How are we going to do this? Next slide. So back to that analogy, you can keep drawing it back. What you need to do is look at the whole production flow of your system. Right from the start, the water you're putting on crops, and what are the tools, what is that, everything that crop is touching, what are the hands touching, that, and out of that whole production flow, you can start to look at where are there weak points, where do things fall apart. And this actual diagram could be the organizing diagram of a whole produce safety plan. But that's what I'm talking about when we talk about risk reduction sunglasses. You look at your operation with this lens on. Next slide. So it's a living document. So now I'm stepping back to the meta level here. What I will try to do is, objectives, what are the key parts, and how do you do a produce safety plan? How are you going to put this all together? You're the right person to do it. All you got to do is put on these glasses, you gain some information, look at your whole system, and you're just writing and describing your practices and describe how you want to organize things, etc. And that should gain, what I found is that growers actually, it's a relief for them to actually start thinking about application. How would this happen on their farm? What are they going to take from this training? And that it's a living document, taking the pressure off. Start where the growers are. They've gotten all this information, but come back to the beginning and start where you are. And that kind of is the approach that I use with this. And it seems that growers really take to it. And part of it is because I believe it and it's authentic. Next slide. So this energy, driving energy, again, is being able to look at the slides that they have to look at and then run through and have growers look. So what I'm doing by showing them actual pictures is you actually allow them to create their own activation energy, because they're thinking, they're comparing these details which look like their farm. They can imagine on their farm what's going on, and they already have a lot of fire about their operation. They know, they're experts, so they can use something like this, a SOP, and easily just kind of mirror off of it. Next slide. Same thing. So this actually master cleaning plan for field pack lettuce. This comes from that production flow diagram where you looked at a field pack lettuce and everything that the lettuce touches, cleaning management description, an outline of it, and the target frequency, lists of tasks that need to be logged. And all of a sudden, wow, okay, I can see how I can do something like this. Next slide. And you could have a clipboard hanging. Oh yeah, I could see a clipboard could be in a strategic place and kind of, I'm completing this. So this is like how kind of painting what a produce safety plan and then the logs that come out of it can look like. And all of a sudden things start to fall into place within an operation. Next slide. Okay, so when we're talking about fuel, again, it's focus, maintaining. I happen to be like fairly energetic, dynamic, but I'm not necessarily great with organization. In fact, I know I'm not. So I kind of like have learned to ride a whole line of investigation through having a basic flow and then feeding off the audience, and like I'm kindling a fire all the time. And by using examples and sometimes that dynamics or stillness, there might be quiet and then I'll say something loud, or I'll do this, or and it's just naturally how I work. Not everyone works like that, and I don't recommend it necessarily, but it works for me. So let's take another chat break here, and just thinking about fuel, sort of when you think about commanding attention or commanding life force actually to bring content alive, either for yourself or you're doing something around content that helps or motivates the grower to do it. So you end up translating some organization that allows them to wake up. So go ahead and let's take about 30 seconds here just for you to write down what you think your strengths are. Or what you've used to generate focus and energy. Making things visual as possible, whether hands-on or just a few photos, illustrate the concept. Being calm and organized. That's a really good one. Some of the best teachers I know are like that. While you're writing, that was always the teacher I wanted to be. Really organized, calm, and really demanding. And I like get the students just like really see that, but I always flopped when that happened because it wasn't who I was. Oh, come on. 2 responses. When audience asks questions, that's when I know it's working. Yeah, and they're getting the info they want. I know it's working when they start to run down the clock with too many questions. Absolutely, they're engaged, that energy is flying. My energy comes with confidence in material, absolutely. That, when you're really excited, you really know your stuff, or you're really focused on and confident about it, it commands attention and energy. Having good references, good examples, great. Being enthusiastic while encouraging for participants to provide their own examples. Staying organized, calm, compassionate, understanding. Variety of elements, visual, audio, text, audio, examples, etc. Movement, humor. Great, okay. Yeah, Elizabeth Ben I'm seeing here is an example of a great teacher. I think she's here. And you know, where you've got expertise, a great sense of humor, and kind of, you know, fiery and kind of push people and make jokes and whatever, and it can really work. And I've seen great teachers that are much more sort of laid back and calm and organized. So anything can command attention. Just got to find what's right for you. Next. Okay, so traction. Whatever you do, don't do it for too long. That's a good point. This sort of flexible being, you know, you have a plan, a flexible traction plan. So you've got, if you think about, okay, what am I going to do that is going to really change it up and break the monotony or momentum of going slide by slide. And all of you do this potentially to a certain extent, a joke, even little things, raising your voice or hitting something, or like, hey, what's in that bag? Or looking outside, doing something. So stories are great. you know, or some deeper content is great. Those questions, especially if you know growers in the room and you can really focus and bring up and get a dialogue going, great. Even if it's for 30 seconds, suspense, it's great. This paper bag, like what, okay, so what is in this? And people all of a sudden will look up. Can you imagine what I'm about to say? So like this kind of getting people like wondering or interrupting, exaggerating, edge, humor, and caution obviously with that because people can get offended fairly easily. And in fact, there are some things that you might do that can really cause people a lot of trouble. And I don't actually, maybe we could hear some stories. I'll keep going for right now, but having these sticky points. So next slide. I would say I'm thinking at the produce safety plan in module 7, the thing I tried to do this in a virtual training, didn't work all that well, but what I've done, which has really, I feel like worked pretty well, is I start in module 6 in someone else's module with a 4-step cleaning thing on prepping and making like something really stupid, like a s'more or a peanut butter sandwich or whatever. And people have done stuff like that, but you know, do it to illustrate the 4 steps of cleaning. And I wouldn't recommend that people do that, but just for me, that's a good thing. I like doing things that are like really impossible and high level production and really stressful. And I don't know why I gravitate towards that, but somehow I do. So I don't recommend it. But anyway, so this s'more thing I just did in this last training, and I tried to do it with video, but it didn't work because, so I ended up just taking a picture, but something to break it up. And it was at the end of the produce safety thing when you're talking about lots and traceability. And the idea here was actually to do a running extended kind of example where, or demonstration where you create a box with a label, you pack something, and then you clean up after it, you know, with a clean break and disinfect or like sanitize the area. So everyone sees that, all those steps. Next slide. And that would be a really sticky point to jump out. And then asking, next slide, you know, and then asking these questions. Next slide, just keep going. I'm not sure, I think this was, okay. Yeah, so, right, lot codes, labels. So is that gonna work? And then, you know, well, it totally depends. And we can go into looking at other labels and why you might want more information on labels. Next slide. And then getting to traceability, trying to do, you know, do something where you're actually delivering, you're actually doing play acting, or that's what I do. I would do like a pick on one of the growers in the room, and I'll if we're actually at a real training, actually selling them the thing that I made for some ridiculous price and giving them a big invoice, and then calling them up afterwards. You know, so I'm actually acting this out. It takes about 30 seconds. So you would get that idea where you look at, instead of just going through these numbers, you do these steps and you actually can act them out pretty quickly. So that's has been a really good thing, and it's right at the end, and you're like hammering back and forth with a grower doing a mock recall, like pretending that they're you know, they're playing a role, you play a role, and you can set it up beforehand potentially. But you know, really just like, you know, at the fireworks show at the end, you got to like bring on something right at that last bit to kind of get people over the hump. So I'm not saying you do, but that's what works for me. And I feel that energy and that it needs to move in that way. Okay, next slide. So I think about, you know, 1 or 2 traction points, or every 20 minutes, I like to try to change something up or do something. And I know many of you out there do the same thing. So maybe just listing in the chat box for another 30 seconds or so, you know, strategies you've used, whether it be jokes or surprises or demos or questions or, you know, things that have worked for you. Let's see what we get. Polls, video, yeah. That's great. Bad jokes, excellent. questions with long pauses. Sharing stories to demonstrate the value of food safety beyond just food safety, like post-harvest quality, bread, or price, definitely. Nice. How about a really embarrassing one? Next slide, Gretchen. Asking people to jot down the top 3 priorities they intend to implement first as a summary for their class. Oh boy, that's really good. I'm going to use that. Quick games, depending on the group. Yep. Talk about other ways a food safety plan is helpful for training, for business, for other things like COVID. Stories of different experiences to bring humor. Great. Okay, so just in sum, someone's got to bring this content alive. The book, the PSA training guide, in and of itself, sitting there is dead. It's got to be opened up. It's got to be breathed life into. You're the lead in that, or as a trainer, but it's not going to work unless the grower also engages. So somehow, either they got to do it themselves, right, or something's got to happen to breathe life into it. Finding motivation is key. If you're not authentic, you won't have authority, and you're going to lose the attention. It doesn't mean you won't get through the slides, but it's not going to move people in the same way. To activation energy, right? That it does require energy, and it requires a fair bit of energy, like a burning hot 100-watt bulb of energy, and that's a literal amount. And then having this traction plan. What are the things that are going to just throw people for a loop, or get them to pick up their head, or reset their brainwaves? And with those 3 things, I think you can pretty much make a good plan to deliver any strategy. I mean, any of the modules. And of course, none of this replaces knowing the material. That's really important. And you don't have to know all of it, obviously. And where you don't know it, I think it's important to be honest if you get questions, and, actually embrace the ignorance there, or maybe have other people fill in where needed. So that's it for Module 7, which was used an example here, but this is also, again, something that's applicable, I think, to all the modules. And with that, I will sign off, and we'll have some time for some questions, I guess. So Gretchen, are you there and want to give some instruction, or?
I can grab that on.
Oh yeah,
thank
sorry,
you, Han.
yeah, Thomas, yep.
Oh, you're great, you're great. Thank you for that great presentation there. Like Han said, we do have some time for some questions and discussion here. So if anybody would like to unmute themselves and go ahead and talk, or you can also take advantage of the chat box like you've been doing throughout the presentation. I will set some time for that now.
And we do have all the slides in 7 available if anyone wants to narrow in on something. Could be other modules too.
Hans, I think while people are thinking about their questions, maybe one thing that I've seen you deliver this module, and it's always excellent, but I know that Module 7 is also one of the most challenging ones to deliver because of timing. You know, if your team is running overtime, then you're faced with being the person that has to wrap this up when everyone's really eager to get out. So do you have any tips for what you do as a trainer in that scenario, where you have 15 minutes to deliver a presentation you were supposed to have 45 minutes to do?
Yeah.
Not ideal situation, obviously.
It's not ideal, because you're also, and this is where I'm actually, maybe some more veteran folks like Gretchen yourself could answer this too. I don't have so much of a problem doing that if I could cut out some of the material. And so I guess and so I don't exactly have a great answer. I would say what I tend to do is I will really stream over, this stuff that I don't have anything of interest and really focus on hitting those highlight things and the key points, whatever the key analogy is or something. And I would say cut out, some part of like the lot stuff or that isn't really required so much, but is a fun thing to play with when you actually have the time to. So that's not super helpful. And normally, like if I could cut stuff out, I would really recraft it. Like I'd make sort of these different plans depending on the time. So I wish I could say more. I do speed up as well.
I think that helps bring the energy for sure.
Yeah, it's just like, you like an Audible books where you can turn it up to like 1.5 time or 2. That's what helps. So maybe someone who's done this before, like module 7, or when you really got to hit all the slides, that's sort of a requirement here, how to actually do that. I'm putting that question out.
I say, Hans, we also just got a question in the chat box from Aaron. It was saying, how do you address the required, just not required, and product safety rule and gap aspect of the content in module 7?
I'm not sure I understand the question. So how do you address the required, not required? That you mean that the product safety plan is not required?
Yeah, I think they're going off of, we've gone through a day of a good amount of requirements from the produce safety rule, but having something that, isn't necessarily a requirement.
Yeah, well, I hope that I started trying to address that just with this. I actually tried to turn that into an advantage that this isn't required, but it's essential. Like you cannot leave this room and apply this information without having a plan to do it. It just isn't going to work. And so that's how I address this required, not required thing. But maybe I see gap in there. So maybe Aaron, you could either, I guess I'm not totally sure of what you mean by that. Required and PSR/gap aspect. Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the last part of that question. Can I maybe Elizabeth or Gretchen or some of these more veteran trainers out there with the PSA grower training and the actual slides, so it's enough to say summarize the slide, but not obviously read it all, but spend very little time if you had to rush or kind of get through stuff. I'm assuming that may be okay, especially in number 7.
This is Betsy, Hans.
Hi, Betsy.
Hi. I think what came out to us when we were developing module 7 for this question was we ended up tripping across things that were actually in the PSR, which is why there's the required ones, right? And I think the important thing is to highlight those in the context of the value they bring to the process in the development of the plan. And I saw when you asked the questions about what people like about module 7, it's that issue of helping growers use that time most effectively. And like you said in one of your slides, I think like where it all comes together, right? And so I think if you can put it in that context, it's helpful. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's what I'll take away from that.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Any other, I'm interested in sort of from trainers, any problems or issues that have come up that, you're still scratching your head on around this module or, in particular or others. it would be great to hit that now, kind of workshop some of it.
I think one of the challenges that we've encountered over the years, and this is kind of expanding beyond the scope of just the PSA grower training, but when you start doing multi-day training workshops where maybe you're incorporating a farm food safety plan writing portion to it, you end up potentially having growers who are trying to meet different buyer needs. So they may be coming to the training because they need to pass a USDA audit, or they may be coming to the training because they need to have a global gap audit. And I think that's something that I've struggled a bit with as a trainer, to be prepared for that situation. And how can we make this an effective use of everybody's time in using this template that doesn't necessarily meet any one of these particular audit requirements? Because we're not necessarily just teaching to the audit.
Right. Yeah, that's where the actually spending some time looking at the list of attendees before you go, and maybe even getting, being prepared in terms of what are their expectations is really helpful, because this is Module 7 is where this all comes together. And yeah, so the resources, so I usually am sharing resources that are relevant to, like plan writing resources that are relevant to the growers in the room. And so that, I think that's really an important point, is that you tailor it, even if it's not a multi-day workshop, to the growers and what their needs might be. And that's sort of, in the introduction, getting a sense of that. If you haven't done it beforehand, and that at least gives you the day to think about it, and maybe even scramble to find some things or that kind of thing, is really helpful. So people leave with some direction for how to get going on it.
And another interesting concept that I recently heard a grower was telling me about was that they were struggling with the whole idea that in an audit scenario, you're likely to have maybe one announced visit, and a certain number of unannounced visits, where maybe your workers can anticipate when those people might show up and are really on their game for those particular days, but maybe not so on their game on other days. And this grower said, I realized that if I do my own little audits, and I'm constantly, walking around unexpectedly and kind of doing my mini audit, that it definitely fostered a more robust food safety culture on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was just interesting, because I feel like when we're teaching Module 7, it's really about food safety every day, not just food safety for a day.
Right. Yep, exactly. How to make this whole thing work on your farm day in, day out, and use it to your advantage.
Yep. Anybody have any other questions for Hans, or even tips that they want to share before we wrap this meeting up? All right, well, I'm not seeing anything in the chat right now, but if you think of something, I think everybody probably has my contact information, and we can share Hans's email maybe, if you're okay with that.
Yep, it's right there on my phone number. And thanks again for inviting me, and I'm definitely always more than happy to talk to anyone, either on the phone or email, if you want to give a call, and we can share tips and tricks.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much again for joining us today. I really appreciated those examples and how you bring your presentations to life, whether you're online or in person. We really appreciate you being here on this meeting today.
Thanks very much. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Yep. And just a quick wrap up here. We are not going to have a meeting in July. Our next meeting is to be determined. If you have specific topic areas or ideas that you want to suggest, feel free to contact me. Just shoot me an email or give me a phone call, and we'd be happy to set up meetings that cater more to this audience. But in the interim, have a great summer, and we'll be touching base with you guys in the next month about our next meeting. And as always, you can find lots of great resources on our website in both English and Spanish. And follow us on our listserv. You can always, if you're not currently on this particular listserv for the PSA Educators Group, you can email Michelle Humiston, and that's mmc15 cornell.edu to be added so that you are in the circulation to get the notes from these meetings, or you can always check on our website. If you go to resources and then the drop down to educators call, we'll always post the webinar information, which we now, you noticed on this meeting, we now require registration as a security measure. So anytime we have one of these meetings, you will have to register. It won't be just an open call to log into, and there will likely be a password attached to that, which will come in that email confirmation after you register. So thanks again to Hans and to Tommy for introductions and facilitation, and we'll be talking to you all soon. Thanks for joining.